Welcome back to Angelo's Tennis, and I want to talk about what technique actually is. As you can see here behind me, technique, here's the formula. Technique in tennis equals coordination plus movement. So two things when you're developing technique must be in place at all times: coordination and movement. What is coordination? What is movement? These questions will be answered in this video. What is technique? We're going to look at the greatest tennis book of all time, The Advanced Techniques for Competitive Tennis, which is in my library, in my digital library. Technique is a specific sequence of movements or parts of movements used to solve movement-related tasks in sports situations. Used to solve movement-related tasks in sports situations. So, what does that imply? That implies that when you're teaching technique, there must be a situation that the player is trying to solve. If you're teaching technique and there is no situation that the player is trying to solve, this is not tennis technique training. It is something that you made up, you pulled it out of your ass, and you think because so many people are doing it that that is the correct or best way to do it. And I'm going to give you a couple examples here of what I just said means. So let's say you have a player comes on the court, the coach comes out, he wants to teach technique, and he starts teaching technique just for the sake of teaching technique because another player did it or something. It could be another player on the serve. You could look at the serve. You could be teaching technique on the serve and saying, well, this is the best way to serve, or this is how so-and-so serves. And we're looking to get power. This is a really good example here. We're looking to increase our miles per hour. Huge myth, huge mistake in tennis. So what situation or what problem are we trying to solve? Well, by trying to increase our miles per hour, increase our power, that implies that we're trying to solve the fact that we're losing because we don't have enough speed on our serve, and that's the reason why we're losing. And yet there's millions of tennis players out there that are successful at very high levels that don't have a big, powerful serve. So what situation is the coach trying to solve? The coach has to make sure, the coach or the teacher has to make sure that that is a problem that the player actually has. And so the coach can often be fooled when the player comes and says, well, I lost my match. Well, you lost one match. And the player may think, or the coach may think, it's because my serve isn't big enough, because they lost one match. And that might not actually be the real problem. And that is why you have to get that first part right. What technique is a specific sequence of movements or parts of movements used to solve movement-related tasks in sports situations? What is the problem that you're trying to solve? So let's talk about coordination, because that's usually you think of children or beginners, the first problem is coordination. What is coordination? Well, in tennis, when we're talking about what is coordination, it can be many things, but the primary thing that it is the tracking and receiving of the ball. So it's the throwing of the ball and the receiving of the ball. Very basic. So this is why you have children throwing balls back and forth, learning how to throw, learning how to catch. And of course, when we're talking about throwing the ball with a tennis racket and catching it with a tennis racket, it becomes more advanced than just throwing and catching a ball. So first we have throwing and catching of the ball. Then we have the throwing and the catching of the ball with the racket, where the ball's movement and the action of the ball is going to be more dynamic. It's going to be more complex than any other throw or catch that you ever had to play in any other game. Hockey, baseball, soccer. I would say soccer's an interesting one. I never really thought about this until now, actually. Soccer's an interesting one because the ball, what you can do with the ball with your foot, can be very similar to tennis. But If you think of baseball, it's not as dynamic with the baseball throw. So this idea of catching and receiving has to be done and has to be progressively improved so that it's very dynamic and complex as what we see in an actual tennis game, or as I said, in a soccer game. So that's primary what we're talking about. This is a primary problem when it comes to coordination that most players most players can't solve overnight. It's something that takes a lot of time, and until this is done, everything that I'm about to say really is coming after that. You can do it at the same time, but until that first part is solved, you're never going to really advance on this technique path. Now the next question is, what is movement, and what's the best way to actually know that you've improved your movement so that we get coordination plus movement equals technique? Because this is where a lot of people get this wrong. You see all the videos about footwork, the drills, etc. And all you really need to do is start from the beginning. Short tennis. And I'm going to put up on the screen here. I'm going to put up on the screen a picture of a short tennis court. Guarantee if you're watching this, you've never seen a short tennis court before. It's not a mini tennis court. And I wish I had a good partner to do this. I could make a video for it of what short tennis actually looks like and how much it improves your movement and really solves this problem. What problem? The problem of movement. It really solves this problem of quote-unquote footwork or movement, short tennis. So you master the short tennis game. You master it by playing it. And this can happen in a day. This can happen in a week. This can happen in a month. It depends on the person. So if you take a person who's let's say a person who's playing, has pretty good coordination, they're playing from the back of the court, they're not very quick. And of course, maybe they're limited by their biology. Maybe they're never going to be quicker than they are. But we don't really know that. So let's try it out. They're in the back of the court. They're not very quick. They're not the best mover. And you might ask them, have you ever played short tennis? No, I've never played short tennis. You put them on a short tennis court, all of a sudden their movement breaks down. And you can see you can see that they can improve by playing short tennis. And then you let it play out. You have them play short tennis. Next step, mini tennis. Same thing. We're gonna make the court a little bit bigger. It's gonna change the movement patterns, and we're gonna learn a lot of the same things we learned on the short tennis court, but more. And then you could even go 60 feet, as we do with the orange ball. Anybody can do this. You can go 60 feet, and that's gonna give you different movement patterns. And then we can go full court, and then we can even make the player move back even farther. And through this change of court size, you can actually learn movement. And then of course we come back to the coordination. If you want to really get good at your movement, you have to change the pattern of the catching and the receiving, and that's where we have the patterns of play and different patterns we can playing different players. This is where the coach can come in, and this is where feeding does not work. Feeding does not work in short tennis. It can work that the use of feeding can be used in order to start the game, to get them to get a feeling of it. But at some point, the game's got to be played. So you can use the feeding for all of them to slow it down, but then you want to go into the actual game as soon as possible. And I want to mention something here, what we're going to call consistency. Because often if you actually do what I'm describing, the game looks ugly. It's very scattered. It's very hard. Balls are flying everywhere. And that's a necessary step to get to what the pros are looking like. It's not let's make ourselves look like the pros. No, it's do everything that I mentioned, and then try, after you've mixed in the varied gameplay where it's completely wide open. Now let's try to do some patterns consistently. Think of the cross court. Let's see if we can hit cross court only in the mini tennis court, and then I'll go down the line, and then you go cross court. All these different patterns that I have in another book that I'm going to put on the screen. They're also in this book as well. I'm going to put the other book on the screen that has a lot of these patterns. This is how you develop technique. If you asked any professional player who you think has impeccable technique, guarantee you, if you ask the two of them together to do these patterns, they can do them instantly. And it's because they've went through this process. They've either done it consciously or unconsciously. Unconsciously would be they just played a lot of matches and they didn't even realize what was happening. You can do it both ways. In fact, they usually do it both ways. So just to repeat, the game is going to be played on all the courts. And then to take it a step further, if you want to practice, all the patterns, including approach and volley, etc., all the patterns that you can think of in tennis are going to be practiced in a training or a consistency method where both players know what they're doing, as opposed to just hitting anywhere you want. Now I want to put another picture on the screen, and we see here there's a bridge. We have a bridge between two buildings, or essentially, I don't know what they would be called. I forget what they would be called, but the two buildings on either side of a bridge. You have tennis technique on one side, and you have conditioning, strength, and speed on the other. And in between those two buildings is the bridge, and the bridge is coordination. Now, if you look at that picture, if any one of the if the bridge is broken, if coordination is broken, or if conditioning is missing, or if endurance is missing, or speed is missing, or strength is missing, there's going to be a breakdown in the technique. That's what that picture means. So when we're looking at a, let's say, a Division I tennis player, a professional tennis player in any one of these high-level 5.0, 12 UTRs, etc., what we're looking at in their technique is their coordination, their speed, their strength, and their endurance is developed or trained to a high level. So what does that mean? Let's take the idea of endurance. More likely than not, when you're looking at one of these players, they can run. I once heard this from a college coach that he required all of his players to be able to run 3 miles within 21 minutes. So that's approximately 7 minutes per mile. So I'd say that's fairly accurate. If you're playing at this level, more likely than not, if someone asks you to run 3 miles in 21 minutes, you probably could do it. Even if you're not running, but you're playing a lot of tennis, you probably still could do it. But if you wanted to test it, you would do 3 miles within 21 minutes. So if you're wondering if your technique, well, what's my technique missing? I feel like it's missing something. Can you run 3 miles in 21 minutes? That's something that you can do and you can test. And you can say, if you can do that, you can assume that your endurance is developed at a high enough level that it shouldn't affect your technique against X, Y, and Z player that you're playing. Now, how about condition? That would be conditioning, and we could say endurance. We could look at endurance. Can you play a 3-set match? Can you play tennis for 3 hours without getting tired? That's something you can test. You can test as well and see if you're getting tired. Maybe your endurance isn't quite there. That's going to affect your technique. Speed. Can you run? How fast can you run 100 meter? How fast can you do these court tests where they dart back and forth and all that? You've seen all the drills and the exercises that they do. Can you even do those successfully without feeling like you're going to die? All the different speed, and I'll put the picture of the book that I have that is also in my library. Can you do these speed drills and certain frequency time tests? And we'll look at strength. Have you lifted weights at all? Do you lift weights? Can you do a pull? You can even skip the weights and say, how many push-ups can you do? Can you do 30 push-ups? Can you do 20 push-ups? Can you do 40 push-ups? How many pull-ups can you do? If you can't do a pull-up, your strength probably isn't up to par. If you can't do 30 push-ups in a row, your strength probably isn't up to par. Again, if you feel like you're going to die when you're doing 30 push-ups, your strength probably isn't up to par. So these are tests that you can do, and all these things are going to equal great technique. So you might ask yourself the question before your coach starts jumping in, telling you to do this and to do that. Can you do these things? Can you meet these markers? Can you pass these tests? Because In order to have great technique, you must pass these tests. That's what this is saying. Of course, there's many more finite details that can be included in this. I just gave you a very general breakdown of what technique training in tennis is.